I'm going to talk about the topic of shamanic sickness. And so there are two sort of segments to this talk. And the first is talking about shamanic sickness in a traditional sense. And that is what happens to people who are called to spiritual work, what experiences or initiations they may go through, what sicknesses they may experience on their path to becoming a competent spiritual worker. I will also talk about shamanic sickness in the context of what happens when, things go awry. There are ways that people practicing shamanic work or spiritual work can and do get quite sick. And I'm going to go over a bit about why that is and share a bit about what that might look like as well. So I will start by sharing that not everybody needs to be called to spiritual work to become a spiritual worker and to become good at it. Um, And I want to make that distinction clear because there can be a huge distinction between people who pick up shamanic tools um, and utilize them for their own benefit, or maybe even for their client base if they have one, perhaps just stand alone or utilizing them in context with other tools in their toolkit, body work, other forms of energy work, all of that sort of stuff. And it is not a necessity to be called to this work or to go through shamanic initiations in order to be a competent spiritual worker. I want to share this in part because it's a question that some people have for me, because there are people that do have shamanic capacities that can do work that is just fine, too good, too excellent, and they aren't necessarily called or going through the same sort of initiation process. Um, there are then some of us who do go through a lot of initiations, a lot of, testing, initiation, a lot of kind of drama, so to speak, through going through this particular type of awakening. In my book, The Spiritual Awakening Guide, I talk about shamanic awakenings and I talk about how severe they are. They are one of the more severe or intense forms of spiritual awakening. And if they're, as an author, you always have parts of your book looking back that you wish that you could change or shift the tone or language a bit in. And I wrote that book primarily, it took me about 3 years to write, but I wrote the bulk of it probably in 2012, 2013. Obviously, I have different thoughts today, but at that point in time, in particular for that section, I was going through a lot of pretty intensive, hellish experiences through going through a shamanic awakening. And one of the things that happens when you are able to see or sense things that other people are not, and that you start to struggle with them, is that you want to kind of continually point it out to other people. Like, no, there actually are spirits you can work with, like, no, that, what is presented popularly as shamanism is kind of the surface waves of what is possible in terms of the depth and beauty of this work. And so once I got over myself a bit, which happened kind of in 2016, 2017, something like that, I started to look at things a bit differently. And that is an understanding that people come to shamanic work or any type of spiritual work for a particular reason. And for some people, it may be more of a mental or intellectual understanding. For some people, it may be kind of basic self-help. and that, people find the depth that they are looking for. Not everybody is looking for, the bottom of the ocean or sort of finds themselves there. Some people are more happy paddling the surface waves or, have a necessity to go kind of midstream, but aren't necessarily, waving hello to Cthulhu sort of thing. Um, and so I'm sharing this because some of you who are watching this may have read that section of my book, and I would say now I'd write about it a bit differently and a bit more compassionately. And I would say that shamanic awakenings, along with Kundalini awakenings, tend to be the most intensive forms of awakening. And some people go through both, which is a double whammy. I really wouldn't wish on anyone, but it can and does happen. But let's talk about shamanic sickness now that I've, stopped talking about myself. So shamanic sickness in a traditional sense can be likened to the path of the wounded healer. However, this is going to be different in a couple different ways. So the path of the wounded healer is typically that somebody has an illness or an experience, maybe a mental health issue, maybe physical disability or physical difficulty. Maybe there is a friend or family member that has gone through something intense, and through that process, the person either desires to heal that within themselves or to learn about it and heal it for other people. And so I'll describe the process in two different ways. One of my dear friends, when she was growing up, her mother suffered from breast cancer and passed away. This kind of clinched her desire to learn more about cancer, to become a cancer researcher, and eventually to become a holistic healer focused on cancer, helping cancer patients, particularly pediatric cancer patients. And so that was her path of the wounded healer. She did not experience it herself, but through the experience of having a loved one go through it, it significantly shifted her path, shifted her calling to learning more about it and learning how to heal it in others. The more traditional path of the wounded healer is somebody who is suffering from a particular ailment, let's say depression or maybe chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, an autoimmune issue, migraines, something like that, where through the process of healing themselves, they gather the tools, the understandings, and the capacity to help others down that same path. And so it is pretty typical for people in the wounded healer role to be healing people who are basically reflections of themselves or who they were anywhere from 6 months ago to a decade ago, depending on how far into their process they basically are. And so this is a wonderful archetype. It can lead to a lot of healing, a lot of wonderful things occurring, a lot of, a good alchemy between practitioner and client, because what happens is a sort of synchrony if you are truly engaged with your clients, in which you are working with them to help them with their issues, or imbalances, but their presence in your lives triggers something within yourself as well. It furthers your own healing, it furthers your own insights, it furthers, shifts your own energy in a way that is really beautiful. And this is a result of two individual fields coming together that are pretty similar, and so they merge pretty well with one another. And so in that merging process, a lot of healing can occur for both parties. So let's discuss how that differs from shamanic sickness then. Somebody who is called to be a spiritual worker I'll share in a moment why I hate the word shaman, but in the in the second section, but it may be obvious to a lot of you, but I'll get into that in a moment. But I prefer the term spiritual worker for myself, for a lot of reasons. But somebody who is called to spiritual work, who is going through a shamanic awakening, um, they are going through the path of the wounded healer in some regards, but it's kind of multiplied. And what I mean by that is that it is fairly typical for people who are really called to this work to have the need to heal their community. And so that means that they might encounter people that are exactly like them, and they may encounter people that are entirely different from them. And so what happens in terms of shamanic sickness is that it, in the wounded healer sort of archetype, it typically is one illness. It is somebody who has migraines and learns how to manage their migraines. And so they begin to help other people with pain and migraines because they learn so much about migraines and have, healed themselves or healed with the support of others. And so that is their path. That is their focus. And plenty of people will write on their websites exactly what their wounded healer path is. I work with infertility, I work with migraines, I work with trauma, I work with, all of this sort of stuff. In shamanic sickness, the effect is kind of more of, I guess, a roulette wheel, I imagine, but it is the person called to this work will go through many forms of physical, emotional, spiritual, mental health, mental illness, illness, sickness of many, many different kinds, and they will need to find their way out of it. And so it is pretty typical for somebody who has shamanic illness to have symptoms mysteriously come on. And then what happens is that the person has to sit with those symptoms to feel what they feel like from the inside out and to discover what patterns may be involved with that, what needs for healing, what imbalances are involved with that. And that is all felt and embodied through somebody going through shamanic sickness. And over time, what will happen is that the shamanic sickness will pass as the person figures out how to heal it in themselves and starts to heal other people of that same sickness, of that same imbalance. And so we can look at it as kind of, wounded healer magnified, but the what happens, like I said, kind of the trademarks of this is that things will come on quickly. They will be mysterious, as in they won't tend to show up on lab tests or, doctors will sort of shrug their shoulders sort of things. And they will tend to pass suddenly as well. And when they do, the person experiencing them will know how to heal in a new way, gather new sources of power, information within, experience a shift in consciousness, a shift in personal power as well. And so this can be pretty brutal for people experiencing this type of calling, this type of awakening. It isn't something, there's that old thought of like, people knew what their path was, they wouldn't want it sort of thing. It is always, grass is always greener sort of thing. I would say that for anyone experiencing this, that it does provide a large opportunity to shift your own consciousness and to be able to heal large aspects of self that other awakenings don't, kind of afford. The other thing is that, a lot of healing to a certain point, especially in the West, tends to be quite self-absorbed. And it is that way for a reason. We need to heal our own stuff. But the type of awakening that is, would be classified as a shamanic awakening, it is geared to get somebody to the point where they can be of service to others. And so the focus is on being of service to the community, not just kind of self-healing. A lot of other, awakenings, even including Kundalini awakenings and some of the other ones are pretty, self-focused. Can you come out of your own stuff and be of service, be of light to others experiencing a Kundalini awakening? Sure. Can you also go live in a cave somewhere and, take yourself away from the rest of society and not, worry about helping other people through various forms of physical, emotional, spiritual sickness? Yeah, you could do that with other forms of awakening. And so there are ways for people who are going through this type of awakening to let go of it or to offer it to others. It's kind of consider it kind of an energetic transmission, energetic download. It can be passed on to somebody who's more willing to go through it. I've helped some people go through that, but the prevailing notion in our culture that, anybody who experienced early childhood trauma is somehow a shaman or called to shamanism. My basic There is a basic need for people in that category to heal, and shamanic tools can really help. But the real question is, if they are experiencing some of the pretty intensive calling signs of shamanic sickness, which are pretty specific, and if they are having, shamanic teachers and going through varying initiations, varying shamanic dismemberments, all these sort of initiations to build power, to release emotions, to be able to be there for other people. So a lot of people more in the kind of, I will call it, gently pop culture ideas, sort of grasping on to the notion of becoming a shaman or a spiritual worker because they feel wounded. They may wish to look at if they actually want to have their lives surround helping other people. And that would probably answer a lot of questions about if they're going through this type of calling or not. I will leave things there. So let's talk about shamanic sickness in the West. So I'm going to talk about this in a slightly different capacity. And I am going to utilize an ocean metaphor yet again. Picture that there is a beautiful ocean. Most people, in terms of that ocean, are sitting on the sand in front of that ocean with their backs towards that ocean. Some people are sitting on the sand facing the ocean. Other people have dipped their toe in that ocean or have gone ankle deep or hip deep, or maybe are swimming mid-ocean or in the depths of that ocean. And the reason why I mention this metaphor is because I find that it is an excellent description for people's relationship with spirit in the modern world. Most people are on that beach with their back towards the ocean. They cannot see the ocean. Maybe they have a little bit of a sense of that ocean, but they truly don't believe that that ocean is there. They may be participating in all sorts of spiritual, shamanic, other, activities and hope that it is there. But their form of reality is looking away from that ocean, that basic denial or disconnection from spirit. And so those of you who have read some philosophy probably know here that I am borrowing heavily from Plato's allegory of the cave, in which, for those of you who have not read it, it's, one of those ways to, I guess, go a little bit ankle deep in terms of philosophy. It's a short read, it's a profound read, it's an easy read. It talks about our relationship with reality, that most of us are looking at shadows on the cave wall, thinking that that is reality. And so in my version of this, borrowing heavily from it, most of us are the ocean being the other, being the spirit realms, being the divine, being our connection to divinity. Most of us have our backs to that, facing away from it. It is all around us. It is there, it is present, but we are not able to turn around and face it and see it and fully acknowledge its presence. Um, and so I talked a little bit about this in the previous video, but over the years of teaching, um, I used to have students a couple decades ago when I first started teaching shamanic work have sort of a tenuous connection with spirit, but a lot of fear there based off of the myths and, religious structures of our society. And now the bulk of people that I interact with are, really want to feel that connection, but are entirely disconnected. Their backs are facing that ocean. And so the reason that I'm going in such depth with this, because I think I have sat with this form of shamanic sickness for a long period of time. And what this sickness is that people taking a professional role, so they're calling themselves shamans or spiritual workers, or they are teaching shamanic or spiritual work, in which they are doing things like calling on spirits, in which they are telling the world that they are shamans, that they are spiritually connected, they are doing spiritual work for others. And what ends up happening is that they end up getting very, very sick. Can anything range from anything from just a lot of fatigue to major issues with the central nervous system, heart attacks, strokes, psychosis, major mental health issues, things like that. That is kind of the severity of things. I am not somebody that typically tries to introduce fear. I think that we have enough fear in this world. I will be the first one to tell you that I'm assuming communities are the same exact way today, but if you go online into a particular spiritual or shamanic community and start, discussing things, there are going to be a lot of people telling you not to do magic, not to do spiritual work, not to do shamanic work, how dangerous and terrible it is, and all of that. And what they're doing is reflecting their own fear, reflecting their own stuckness into that group. And so they are not, typically coming from a place of knowledge or experience. I can tell you that doing shamanic and spiritual work, the basic tools of it can offer a lot of good life-affirming stuff, kind of even the basic sort of pop stuff, if it makes you feel good in some ways, I'm, okay, go for it and do what you need to do to feel a bit better in this world in which, there's so much suffering out there. But there is this contingent of individuals that become incredibly ill, incredibly sick, and even pass away. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that they may be people whose backs are to the ocean. They do not have any faith or belief or real interaction in a direct way with the spirit realms. And if somebody is doing spiritual work without support, they are going to be sick. Spiritual work is intended to be done in connection. You are intended to work with the spirits, either have the spirits work with you, in tandem or in a merged state, or have the spirits do the work themselves. Will you may like direct or, give offerings or something like that, depending on how things go. So that is one reason that I have sat with that I think that a lot of people get quite sick is that I've run across enough people by now, I would say somewhere upwards of 20 or 30, that are doing this work professionally. They announce themselves as, shamanic healers, practitioners, spiritual workers, and they have no belief or regard for this work. And so, what happens when you are playing a role and you don't truly believe in it is also that you don't take care of yourself. And so, mental health issues can get worse, and you wouldn't be energetically taking care of yourself or physically taking care of yourself either. This job really requires physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health. And so it requires somebody being grounded, their systems being open, in order to be that empty vessel, in order to have energy, to have spirit flow through. So if somebody is significantly out of balance, let's say mentally, but it could be physically as well, is that any sort of shamanic or spiritual healing work that they're going to do is going to bring that problem very loudly into the forefront. And so this is why people engaged with shamanic work can get more mentally sick or emotionally sick, rather than, healing or coming to a state of health. There is also the energetics of it is that, doing this work, I do not think that people talk about energetics or the mechanics of energy flow through the body enough. And so, how do we interface with spirit? We interface with spirit through our nervous system. If I were to talk, we have a physical nervous system. We also have a spiritual nervous system. Our spiritual nervous system is our physical nervous system. So our brain and spinal column and everything associated with that, as well as the chakras and basically our energy field. When we come into contact with spiritual energy, what happens is that our chakras take it in. We eventually experience it on a physical nervous system level, and then we're intended to release from our bodies through the chakras, through our palms, through our feet, through our pores, through, through breath. Sometimes, unfortunately, through throwing up, through snot, through going to the bathroom, all of these methods of release from our body of energies. And so people who either may not be in a place of, where their backs are to that ocean, where they do not believe in things, or they're just not are not energetically taking care of themselves, getting regular physical exercise, having their energy be kind of that empty vessel so the energy can flow through it instead of being stuck. Or if energy does get stuck, to look towards energetic, emotional, spiritual healing for that stuckness or for whatever imbalance is coming up in their lives. They tend to be the ones that sort of get really out of balance. And I will say as a last thing that I do think that it is an effect that if somebody is kind of playing that role of being spiritual healer, of being spiritual worker, and they do not have connections, and not only that, they do not have belief. There is sort of the concept of, intention and being a bad faith actor. They talk about this a lot with Zen sickness as well, is that our intention matters. In Zen sickness, it would be a lot about morals because, Confucianism and, stuff like that. But I would argue that the same thing can happen with shamanic sickness as well. If you are playing the role of, shaman and you don't have connections and you don't actually believe in this work. All of us have doubt. I teach people to only be 97% certain, because that that 3% can save somebody from, insanity or being really out of balance. But um, people playing a role tend to be the ones without any faith, which means without any regard, without any connection to the spirit realms. When they do this work for long enough, when they announce themselves for long enough, that they are a particular way, when they are leading others, the blind leading the blind sort of thing in some cases, um, that they tend to be the ones that come down with really difficult to treat central nervous system, stroke, heart, energetic, imbalances, mental health issues that are extraordinarily hard to treat, because there is a need to work through not only their own stuff, but also other stuff, other people's stuff that is collected in their system, because they've been taking it on and haven't been in a place to be able to have their spirits take that energy on for them, or to have that energy flow through and out their body. I will mention one last thing, which is always like a fun topic, which is the way that I will say that I do not like the word shaman. Um, I unfortunately have called my books the Shamanic Workbooks, because working with the elements, working with ancestors, working in the way that I do with spirits of place, working with, all of that sort of stuff that goes under that banner. I do admittedly have a lot of mixed feelings about it, because I am neither indigenous, coming from a lineage where that is accepted or understood in the community. Although I have studied with teachers from all sorts of varying lineages, I would not, my ancestry doesn't go there. My personal energy doesn't go there. In fact, the other thing is that, I understand the pain and the rage of, kind of the more pop psychology shamanism that is so popular, because here we are taking this word and this, beautiful in-depth healing that is about spiritual connections, that is about healing on this really deep level, and turning it into something for, people whose backs are turned to that ocean. And so, in closing, I'm going to talk about everybody's favorite topic, which is colonization, because I recognized a long time ago nature of loops, which are, talk about this a bit in my Body Deva book. I really get into it in my Shadow Work for the Soul book. And that is that on a personal level, we tend to repeat patterns that are out of balance or wounded within ourselves again and again. We do it on an interpersonal level as well. We do it on a collective level as well. And so the way that shamanism came to the West, became popularized, is through colonization. It is through going into cultures whose agency, whose land, whose personhood had, whose power had been stripped from them. And what happens when we take power from another, either as an individual or as a group, is that we lose some of our own soul. We become sick on a soul level. We become empty on a soul level as an individual, as a group. And so as a result of colonizing cultures, that resulted in a great deal of soul loss for the colonizers. And so what happened then was a recognition on some level on the part of the colonizers that some level of soul loss, some level of connection from spirit was lost. And so what did colonizers do? They went and did the same loop again. They went to the communities whose personhood, whose power, whose agency that they had stolen, and they attempted to colonize their spirituality. So take their spirituality from them. And largely what happened was that people came back from studying as an outsider shamanic communities that had a spiritual healer, and they were hearing second or third hand accounts, or they were going in and just witnessing what was happening instead of practicing it and working with it themselves. And largely what happened then is that they would come back and put it within a context that was largely Christian in scope. And so a lot of what I see of spirituality, spiritual books, shamanic books are still within that framework, even pagan books that are like, I hate Christianity. Now let's, look at Hecate in a Christian framework without full recognition of that, of course. But I'm somewhat putting a little bit of lightness in here for a reason, because it's such a heavy topic, but it is really helpful to understand because the attempt to rectify soul loss, the attempt to gather soul, has been from attempted colonization of other spirits, other souls. And that doesn't work. It doesn't create power. It doesn't create connection. All it does is create a belief that spirituality is in another group. It is in another land. It is somewhere besides for beneath our feet, in the world around us, and the food around us, and the herbs around us, and the people around us, um, in the concrete, so to speak. And so part of my attempt to, this puts me in an odd place because I have known some people that have gone through what might be called like the core shamanism programs or pop, psychology things. I even took a course or two myself, back in the day before, I came to sort of a series of epiphanies. I will say that the thing that fully made me split from those workshops and communities was being in a workshop in which we were, it was predominantly like, 90% white people, white upper middle class women. And we were intended to do something called a ghost dance. And I don't share a whole lot of my spiritual experiences specifically, but I'll share one here because I think that it's helpful. I had a Native American spirit come to me, and I am not somebody who has like gobs of Native American spirits coming to her. Um, Funny enough, I used to work by by a train, and so there's a lot of spirit activity in that train. And so I just, one day had a Native American spirit come to me just because he was passing through and was curious what the energy was about. But before that, I don't have like, I'm not secretly a Cherokee princess or any of that sort of nonsense that people, used to talk about through the 70s and 90s, and luckily has waned down a little bit. But in this experience, I had a Native American spirit come to me and say, this wasn't for you. I voiced that because that's just part of my nature, is to be pretty straightforward. And the teachers assured me that they were explicitly told that they could do this, that it was shared, and all this sort of stuff. But it was extraordinarily uncomfortable. And when I went home and started researching and asking people who were in the know about this dance, it turns out that it was a dance of grief, a dance of death from the experiences of colonization, the experiences of loss of bodies, of life, of self. And so there's no way that those communities would want a bunch of people twirling around and pretending to dance like that. But that was kind of the moment for me, although it had been coming for a long time, which I completely split from wanting to have anything to do with that sort of culture, that sort of understanding of shamanism. That being said, I've certainly known some people who have utilized the tools of those workshops and have found their own connection to spirit. So I do my best not to judge, but in the shamanism that I offer, or I really think that our world needs to come into to break this loop of colonization where we are, feeling that spiritual emptiness and we are attempting to rectify it by taking the spirit, taking the soul of others, just repeating that loop of colonization, is to develop our own relationship with the elements, to develop our relationship with the tree in our yard, with our pets, with the animals that surround us, with the botanicals, with the leaves, with the trees. Do you know what trees are in your yard? Do you know what bushes are in your yard? Do you know what herbs are in your yard? Gardening, connecting to the spirits and history of place, what took place on your land, what happens when you directly connect, utilizing shamanic tools to the spirits of your land, the spirits of history, the spirits of the community around you. That can bring back soul, bring back energy, and really sort of let that loop of wounding that is so apparent, so prolific in shamanic communities die the death that it really, really needs to die. So thanks for hanging in there with me. For those of you who have made it to the end of this, I realize it's kind of a heavy topic. It's an important and interesting one. And so feel free to put down your thoughts or till next time.